The evening sky turned dark purple as Olivia Bennet walked out of the university library. Her backpack felt heavy with law books after 6 straight hours of studying for finals. She checked her watch, almost 11 p.m. Her dad would probably text soon to make sure she was okay. Olivia climbed into her old blue Honda, tossed her backpack onto the passenger seat, and started the drive home. The streets were quiet on this Tuesday night, just a few cars passing by. She turned on the radio to stay awake, tapping her fingers on the steering wheel as she stopped at a red light. In her rearview mirror, red and blue lights suddenly flashed. Olivia's heart jumped. She hadn't been speeding or running any lights. She pulled over right away, just like her father had taught her. "Stay calm, be polite, and keep your hands where they can see them," his voice echoed in her head. Officer James Delgado approached her window with his hand resting on his gun. Something about his walk, the way his face was set in a hard frown, made Olivia's stomach twist with worry. "License and registration," he barked before she could even roll down her window completely. "Good evening, officer," Olivia said, keeping her voice steady. "May I reach into my glove box for my registration?" The officer nodded stiffly. Olivia moved slowly, pulling out her documents and handing them over. "Can I ask why you pulled me over?" "I don't think I was speeding." Officer Delgado shined his flashlight directly in her face, making her squint. "Step out of the vehicle." "I'm sorry, what?" Olivia's voice cracked. "I said step out of the vehicle now." His voice rose sharply. Confused and increasingly scared, Olivia unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out. A small group of people had gathered at the gas station across the street, watching the scene unfold. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," Officer Delgado commanded. "Wait, please," Olivia said, her heart pounding. "I don't understand what's happening. I'm just driving home from the library." "You match the description of a suspect in a convenience store robbery that happened an hour ago," he said, grabbing her wrist. "Female, early 20s, dark hair, driving a blue sedan. That's half the women in this city." Olivia protested. "I've been at the university library all evening. You can check with the librarian. I signed in." "Stop resisting," Officer Delgado shouted, though Olivia wasn't fighting back at all. He twisted her arm behind her, making her yelp in pain as cold handcuffs snapped around her wrists. "I'm not resisting. Please, look at my student ID. It's in my wallet." "I'm a law student. My father is." "Save it for the station," he cut her off, pushing her toward the police car. Across the street, someone had started filming on their phone. Olivia felt tears burning in her eyes, not from the pain but from the humiliation. People were watching her being arrested like a criminal. "Officer, please check my ID. This is a huge mistake." She tried again as he pushed her head down to put her in the back seat. "Everyone's innocent, aren't they?" Delgado said with a smirk. "Got a real lawyer type here, boys," he called to the second officer who had just pulled up. "Probably thinks she knows the law better than we do." The second officer, younger with a nervous look, glanced at Olivia's student ID that had fallen onto the pavement. "Aunt Delgado, it says here she's from law school." "So what? Criminals can't go to college," Delgado snapped, slamming the door with Olivia inside. Through the window, Olivia could see the younger officer pick up her wallet, looking unsure. Inside the police car, she tried to steady her breathing. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be. As they drove away, Olivia watched her car, with all her notes and laptop inside, getting smaller in the distance. They wouldn't even let her lock it. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she thought about the one call she would get at the station. Her father had always been her hero, but tonight she needed more than a dad. She needed Special Agent Thomas Bennett of the FBI. And Officer Delgado had no idea what was coming his way. Special Agent Thomas Bennett rubbed his tired eyes as he sorted through another stack of case files. The office had emptied hours ago, but the soft glow of his desk lamp kept him company as he worked late, again. 20 years with the FBI's Public Corruption Unit had taught him one thing: paperwork never ended. His phone buzzed. Thomas glanced at the clock, 11:42 p.m. Who would call this late? The screen showed Olivia calling. His daughter never called this late unless something was wrong. "Olivia?" he answered quickly. The sound of his daughter crying made his heart stop. Dad, she sobbed, her voice echoing in what sounded like a hard, empty room. What's wrong? Where are you? Thomas stood up so fast his chair rolled back and hit the wall. I'm at the police station on 5th Street, Olivia managed between sobs. They arrested me. They think I robbed a store, but I was at the library all night, I swear. Thomas felt his face grow hot as he grabbed his keys. Tell me exactly what happened, he said, his voice low and controlled despite the anger building inside him. As he hurried to his car, Olivia explained everything. The traffic stop, the officer refusing to check her ID properly, the handcuffs, the humiliation. They only gave me one phone call, she whispered. Dad, I'm scared. The officer who arrested me keeps walking by the cell, smirking at me. Listen to me, Thomas said firmly as he started his car. Don't say another word to anyone. I'll be there in 15 minutes. The drive to the station was a blur. 20 years of FBI training couldn't prepare Thomas for the rage he felt knowing his daughter sat in a cell for something she didn't do. The same daughter who had wanted to be a lawyer since she was 12. The same daughter who had never even had a parking ticket. Thomas parked his car and straightened his tie before walking into the station. His FBI badge felt heavy in his hand. I'm Special Agent Thomas Bennett, he announced to the desk sergeant, his voice cutting through the station's late-night quiet. My daughter, Olivia Bennett, was brought in tonight. I need to speak with your captain immediately. The sergeant's eyes widened at the sight of the FBI badge. Yes, sir. Let me call Captain Rivera. While waiting, Thomas noticed the security cameras in the corner of the room. A quick glance at the monitor behind the desk showed several angles of the holding cells. On one screen, he saw Olivia sitting alone, her head in her hands. On another, he saw an officer walking by her cell, making a talking motion with his hand and laughing with another cop. Thomas's jaw tightened. That must be the arresting officer. Captain Rivera appeared, looking concerned. Agent Bennett, I understand there's been a situation with your daughter. If you'll follow me to my office. I want to see my daughter first, Thomas interrupted. Then we'll talk. The holding cell door opened and Olivia rushed into her father's arms. Thomas hugged her tightly, noticing the red marks on her wrists from the handcuffs. Are you okay? He whispered. She nodded against his shoulder, then pulled back. That's him, she whispered, glancing at an officer standing in the hallway. Officer Delgado, according to his nameplate. Thomas memorized the face, then turned to Captain Rivera. I want to see the body camera footage from the arrest. Now. Back in Rivera's office, the captain shifted uncomfortably. Unfortunately, Officer Delgado's camera malfunctioned during the arrest. But I've reviewed the report, and it seems your daughter matched a suspect description. A vague description that could match thousands of women, Thomas cut in. What about the surveillance footage from this station? I saw Officer Delgado mocking my daughter while she was in the cell. That camera working fine? Captain Rivera paled slightly. Agent Bennett, I understand you're upset, but these things happen. We're processing her release now. Thomas leaned forward. These things happen? My daughter spent 3 hours in a cell because your officer couldn't be bothered to verify her alibi. Because he needed to fill some end-of-month quota. The captain's eyes darted away, confirming Thomas's suspicion. This isn't over, Thomas said quietly as Olivia was brought in with her belongings. Not by a long shot. As they walked out, Thomas put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. His mind was already building a case, connecting dots from other rumors he'd heard about this precinct. Officer Delgado had just made the biggest mistake of his career. He hadn't just arrested the wrong girl. He'd arrested an FBI agent's daughter. The morning sun streamed through Olivia's bedroom window, but she had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the cold metal of handcuffs around her wrists again. Her phone buzzed with concerned texts from classmates who had somehow already heard about her arrest. News traveled fast in a small city. In the kitchen, Thomas Bennett made calls while fixing breakfast. He hadn't slept either, his mind racing with plans. After 20 years investigating corruption, he knew the signs too well. The missing body camera footage, the rushed arrest report, the smirking officer, it all pointed to something rotten in that police department. Morning, Dad, Olivia said, walking into the kitchen still in her pajamas. Dark circles hung under her eyes. Thomas put down his phone and gave her a hug. "How are you feeling, kiddo?" "Like I want to crawl under a rock," she admitted, pouring herself coffee. "My criminal law professor texted me. Somehow he already knows." Thomas nodded grimly. "I'm heading down to the station to get the official arrest report and body cam footage. We need to document everything." "They'll stonewall you," Olivia said. Law school had taught her that much. "Let them try," Thomas replied with a determined look. 2 hours later, Thomas stood at the front desk of the police station, his patience wearing thin. The desk sergeant had disappeared into the back office 20 minutes ago, supposedly to locate the files he'd requested. Finally, a nervous-looking clerk appeared. "I'm sorry, sir. The arrest report for Olivia Bennett is still being processed." And unfortunately, there was a technical issue with Officer Delgado's body camera during the arrest. "A technical issue?" Thomas repeated flatly. "What kind of issue?" The clerk avoided his eyes. "The footage was corrupted. Sometimes these cameras malfunction." "How convenient," Thomas said. "And the station's surveillance footage from the holding area?" "That would require a formal request from your lawyer or a court order," the clerk recited, as if reading from a script. Thomas leaned forward. "I'm a federal agent investigating a potential civil rights violation. Do you really want to play this game?" The clerk swallowed hard but stood his ground. "I'm just following procedure, sir." As Thomas left the station, his phone rang. It was Olivia. "Dad, someone from the police department just called me," she said, her voice shaking. "Lieutenant Wilson. He wants me to come in and sign some paperwork about last night." Thomas's grip tightened on his phone. "What kind of paperwork?" "He said it's a statement confirming what happened. But Dad, he kept emphasizing that I should mention I was uncooperative during the arrest. He said it would smooth things over and they could make this all go away." Thomas's blood boiled. "They're trying to cover themselves. Don't sign anything. I'm coming home." When Thomas arrived, Olivia was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open, taking notes. "I've been writing down everything I remember from last night," she explained. "Times, exact words, descriptions. That officer, Delgado, he kept saying I was the 5th arrest of his shift. He seemed proud of it." Thomas nodded approvingly. "Smart girl. We need to document everything." He pulled out his own notebook. "I made some calls to old friends. Turns out there have been whispers about this precinct for years. Complaints buried, arrests that don't hold up in court, unusual patterns at month's end." Olivia looked up. "You think they have quotas? That's illegal." "Not official ones," Thomas explained. "But maybe unofficial expectations, pressure from higher-ups to show results." His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Parking garage, level 3, 1 hour. Come alone if you want the truth about Delgado." Thomas showed Olivia the message. "It could be a trap," she warned. "Or it could be someone on the inside who's tired of the corruption," Thomas countered. "Either way, we need to find out." He grabbed his jacket. "Stay here and keep documenting everything. Don't answer the door, and if Lieutenant Wilson calls again, tell him you're consulting with your attorney before signing anything." Olivia nodded nervously. "Be careful, Dad." "Always am." Thomas assured her, though they both knew this was different. This wasn't just another FBI case. This was personal. As Thomas headed for his car, Lieutenant Wilson was already drafting a memo to the entire precinct, no comment to outside agencies regarding the Bennett arrest without direct approval. The cover-up was shifting into high gear, but they had no idea who they were up against. Thomas pulled into the dimly lit parking garage, his eyes scanning every corner. 20 years at the FBI had taught him to always be prepared for a trap. He parked on level 3 and waited, one hand resting near his gun. A car pulled up 3 spaces away. A woman stepped out, middle-aged with tired eyes and a police department lanyard partially hidden under her jacket. Thomas recognized her from the station's front desk. "Agent Bennett?" she asked nervously. "I'm Diane from Records." Thomas nodded but stayed alert. "You wanted to talk about Officer Delgado." Diane glanced around the garage. "What happened to your daughter wasn't right," she whispered. "It's not the first time either." She handed Thomas a flash drive. "I could lose my job for this. It's a list of complaints against Delgado, excessive force, false arrests, fabricated evidence, all buried by internal affairs. "Why are you helping me?" Thomas asked. Diane's eyes hardened. "My niece had a similar run-in with him last year. Nobody believed her either." After their meeting, Thomas drove straight to his old partner's house. Mike Chen had retired from the FBI 2 years ago, but still had connections throughout the city. "You're poking a hornet's nest," Mike warned as they reviewed the files in his home office. "Delgado has protection from someone high up." "Look at these patterns," Thomas said, pointing to the dates of arrests, spikes at the end of every month. "And look who's getting arrested, mostly women and minorities, mostly on flimsy charges that get dropped later." Mike whistled. "Looks like unofficial quotas to me." "Exactly," Thomas agreed. Delgado wasn't mistaking Olivia for a robbery suspect. He was looking for an easy arrest to pad his numbers. Thomas's phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Lieutenant Wilson came to the house. I didn't open the door. He left after 10 minutes." Thomas's jaw tightened. This was getting serious. "I need traffic camera footage from the night of Olivia's arrest," he told Mike. "And I need to talk to others who've been falsely arrested." Mike nodded. "I still have friends at the traffic authority. As for the victims, start with these 3 names. They all filed complaints against Delgado in the last year." Back at home, Olivia was compiling her own research. Her legal training was proving useful. "Dad, I found something," she said as Thomas walked in. "I searched court records for cases involving Officer Delgado. Over 70% of his arrests near month-end result in dismissed charges or plea deals for minor offenses. They're using the threat of serious charges to push people into pleading guilty to lesser ones," Thomas realized, "boosting their conviction rates while avoiding scrutiny of the original arrests." "Exactly," Olivia agreed. "And look at this message board for law students. There are dozens of stories about that precinct, same tactics, same officers, same timing." The next morning, Thomas met with Paddy Wong, one of the names Mike had given him. "I spent 2 nights in jail because Officer Delgado claimed I matched the description of a shoplifter," Paddy explained in a quiet coffee shop. "I was walking home from my night shift as a nurse. They pressured me to accept a plea deal for disturbing the peace, even though I did nothing wrong." "Why did you take the deal?" Thomas asked gently. "I couldn't afford to miss more work for court dates," Paddy said, eyes downcast. "And my public defender said it was better than risking the shoplifting charge." By the end of the week, Thomas had spoken with 5 more victims. The pattern was unmistakable. He had also received the traffic camera footage from Mike, clear video showing Olivia's arrest from 3 different angles. "This completely contradicts Delgado's report," Thomas told Olivia as they reviewed the footage. "He claimed you were belligerent and resisting, but the video shows you standing calmly with your hands visible the entire time." Olivia nodded. "We have enough to take this to the U.S. Attorney's office, don't we?" Thomas looked at the evidence they'd gathered: complaint files, court records, victim statements, traffic camera footage. "Almost," he said, "but we need something that proves the department-wide pattern. Something that shows this goes beyond just one bad officer." That night, Thomas received another text from an unknown number. "Check the precinct's monthly performance reports. Compare arrest numbers with officer evaluations. What you need is there." The sender had just given Thomas the final piece of the puzzle. It was time to bring everything into the light. Thomas spread the documents across his dining room table, creating a timeline of events. 3 coffee cups sat empty beside him. He'd been at it for hours. The monthly performance reports his anonymous source had mentioned were gold. They showed a clear pattern. Officers with the highest arrest numbers at month-end received the best shift assignments and overtime opportunities the following month. "It's like a reward system," he explained to Olivia, who was helping organize the evidence. "Not an official quota, but the message is clear: more arrests equal better treatment." Olivia picked up Officer Delgado's performance reviews. "Look at his supervisor's comments. Consistently meets end-of-period targets. That's code for quota." Thomas nodded. "And guess who wrote those reviews?" "Lieutenant Wilson," Olivia read, frowning. "The same guy who wanted me to sign that statement." The doorbell rang, interrupting them. Thomas checked the security camera on his phone. "U.S. Attorney Lisa Patel," he said, surprised. He'd called her office but hadn't expected such a quick response. Lisa sat across from them at the dining table, her eyes widening as Thomas laid out the evidence. Traffic camera footage of Olivia's arrest played on a laptop beside them. "You've been busy," Lisa remarked, examining a chart showing arrest patterns. "This is about more than my daughter," Thomas explained. "This is systematic civil rights violations." Lisa nodded slowly. "I agree the evidence is compelling, but taking on an entire police precinct is complicated. There will be pushback, political pressure. People's lives are being ruined by these false arrests," Olivia spoke up. "They're pressuring innocent people into plea deals to keep their arrest statistics high." Lisa studied Olivia for a moment. "You'd make a good prosecutor someday." She turned back to Thomas. "I'll take this to my boss. We'll need sworn statements from these other victims." "Already working on it," Thomas assured her. After Lisa left, Thomas received a call from Mike Chen. "I got into the department's internal system," Mike said in a hushed voice. "You won't believe what I found. They have a nickname for end-of-month arrests, stat boosters. There's even a leaderboard in their break room." Thomas's face hardened. "Can you send me screenshots?" "Already did. Check your email. And Thomas, be careful. Word is getting around that you're asking questions. Delgado and Wilson have friends in high places." That evening, while Thomas compiled the victim statements, Olivia answered a knock at the door. A young reporter stood on their porch, notebook in hand. "I'm David from the City Tribune," he explained. "I heard about your false arrest and that your father is investigating the precinct. People deserve to know what's happening." Thomas came to the door, initially wary. But after talking with David for an hour, he realized public pressure might help their case. "We're not looking for revenge," Thomas told the reporter. "We want accountability and change." The next morning, David's article ran on the front page. FBI agent uncovers possible police misconduct after daughter's wrongful arrest. Thomas's phone rang nonstop. More victims came forward. Even a rookie officer from the precinct called, offering to speak anonymously about the pressure to make arrests. By afternoon, the police chief had scheduled a press conference, promising a thorough internal investigation. "That's just damage control," Thomas told Olivia. "They're hoping to handle this in-house, where they can control the narrative." "So, what's our next move?" Olivia asked. "We go bigger," Thomas replied. "I just got off the phone with Lisa Puttle. The U.S. Attorney's Office is officially opening a federal investigation into civil rights violations." That evening, as Thomas and Olivia were reviewing new evidence, headlights swept across their living room window. A car had parked across the street. It sat there for an hour, then drove away. "They're watching us," Olivia said nervously. Thomas nodded, drawing the curtains. "It means we're getting close. Tomorrow, I'm meeting with the FBI field office. This is becoming an official bureau investigation." Later, Thomas's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Delgado deleted dashcam footage from previous arrests. "Tech department has backups. Get a warrant before they disappear too." The case was building, piece by piece, but so were the risks. The police station buzzed with nervous energy as FBI agents moved through the building, gathering computers and files. Officers watched in stunned silence. Just 3 days after the U.S. attorney announced an investigation, federal agents had arrived with search warrants. Outside, news vans lined the street. Reporters crowded around the entrance, cameras flashing. The story of Olivia's wrongful arrest had grown into something much bigger, a full-blown federal corruption investigation. Inside his office, Police Chief Richards paced back and forth, his face flushed with anger. "How did this happen?" he demanded, glaring at Lieutenant Wilson. "One wrongful arrest, and now the feds are tearing apart my department." "It's not just about the girl," Wilson admitted, loosening his collar. "They found a pattern. The monthly numbers, the reward system, everything." "You told me that was just motivation for the officers," the chief snapped. Wilson looked away. "Some took it too far, especially Delgado." Down the hall, in the break room, younger officers huddled together, whispering. "I knew those arrest quotas were wrong," Officer Emmy Chen said quietly. "I told Wilson last year that Delgado was targeting easy arrests." "What did Wilson say?" asked Officer Jackson. That I should worry about my own numbers if I wanted to keep the good shifts, Emmy replied. After that, I stopped questioning things. Jackson nodded. Maybe we should talk to the feds. Better to come clean now than be caught hiding something. By afternoon, 3 junior officers had approached the FBI team, offering testimonies about the unofficial quota system. They described how Lieutenant Wilson rewarded aggressive arrest numbers with preferred assignments and overlooked questionable tactics from officers who met their targets. Back at the FBI field office, Thomas reviewed the statements with the special agent in charge. The department's falling apart, Agent Rivera explained. Everyone's pointing fingers. Delgado is saying he was just following Wilson's expectations. Wilson's blaming department culture and pressure from above. Thomas nodded. What about those backup files my source mentioned? The deleted dashcam footage. Found them, Rivera confirmed, sliding a folder across the desk. Tech team recovered everything. Delgado had a pattern of targeting young women and minorities for these end-of-month arrests, many cases with nearly identical language in the reports. Thomas flipped through the files, his jaw tight. This would have continued if he hadn't picked up my daughter that night. Sometimes it takes the right victim to expose a broken system, Rivera replied. Someone they can't intimidate or brush off. That evening, Thomas brought the latest updates to Olivia at home. She was watching the police chief's press conference on TV. After reviewing concerning information, Chief Richards was saying, his voice stiff, I've placed Officer James Delgado and Lieutenant Robert Wilson on administrative leave pending the outcome of these investigations. Administrative leave, Olivia scoffed. That means paid vacation while they investigate themselves. Don't worry, Thomas assured her. The federal investigation trumps their internal one, and we've got more than enough for criminal charges now. Olivia's phone buzzed with a text from her law professor. Remarkable work exposing this. Would you share your experience with my civil rights class next month? She smiled, showing Thomas the message. Despite everything, some good was coming from this nightmare. Late that night, Officer Delgado slipped into the records room at the station. With the building nearly empty, he thought he could safely remove any remaining evidence of his misconduct. He was wrong. Internal affairs investigators, finally pressured into doing their job properly, had been watching him. As Delgado attempted to shred documents, they stepped from the shadows. Officer Delgado, the lead investigator, said, You're making this much worse for yourself. Delgado's face drained of color as he realized he'd been caught. By morning, the news had spread. Delgado was suspended without pay and facing additional charges of evidence tampering. At the police station, the blue wall was crumbling. More officers came forward, describing how the pressure for arrests had corrupted the department. Some admitted falsifying reports to police superiors. Others revealed how complaints were routinely buried. The police chief called an emergency press conference, sweat visible on his forehead. In light of disturbing new information, he announced shakily, I've initiated termination proceedings against Officer Delgado and Lieutenant Wilson. Furthermore, I've requested an independent review of all department policies. Thomas watched the announcement on TV, his expression grim but satisfied. The police station buzzed with nervous energy as FBI agents moved through the building, gathering computers and files. Officers watched in stunned silence. Just 3 days after the U.S. attorney announced an investigation, federal agents had arrived with search warrants. Outside, news vans lined the street. Reporters crowded around the entrance, cameras flashing. The story of Olivia's wrongful arrest had grown into something much bigger, a full-blown federal corruption investigation. Inside his office, Police Chief Richards paced back and forth, his face flushed with anger. How did this happen? He demanded, glaring at Lieutenant Wilson. One wrongful arrest, and now the feds are tearing apart my department. It's not just about the girl, Wilson admitted, loosening his collar. They found a pattern. The monthly numbers, the reward system, everything. You told me that was just motivation for the officers, the chief snapped. Wilson looked away. Some took it too far, especially Delgado. Down the hall, in the break room, younger officers huddled together, whispering. I knew those arrest quotas were wrong, Officer Emmy Chen said quietly. I told Wilson last year that Delgado was targeting easy arrests. "What did Wilson say?" asked Officer Jackson. "That I should worry about my own numbers if I wanted to keep the good shifts," Annie replied. "After that, I stopped questioning things." Jackson nodded. "Maybe we should talk to the feds. Better to come clean now than be caught hiding something." By afternoon, 3 junior officers had approached the FBI team, offering testimonies about the unofficial quota system. They described how Lieutenant Wilson rewarded aggressive arrest numbers with preferred assignments and overlooked questionable tactics from officers who met their targets. Back at the FBI field office, Thomas reviewed the statements with the special agent in charge. "The department's falling apart," Agent Rivera explained. "Everyone's pointing fingers. Delgado is saying he was just following Wilson's expectations. Wilson's blaming department culture and pressure from above." Thomas nodded. "What about those backup files my source mentioned? The deleted dashcam footage." "Found them," Rivera confirmed, sliding a folder across the desk. "Tech team recovered everything. Delgado had a pattern of targeting young women and minorities for these end-of-month arrests, many cases with nearly identical language in the reports." Thomas flipped through the files, his jaw tight. "This would have continued if he hadn't picked up my daughter that night." "Sometimes it takes the right victim to expose a broken system," Rivera replied. "Someone they can't intimidate or brush off." That evening, Thomas brought the latest updates to Olivia at home. She was watching the police chief's press conference on TV. After reviewing concerning information, Chief Richards was saying, his voice stiff, "I've placed Officer James Delgado and Lieutenant Robert Wilson on administrative leave pending the outcome of these investigations." "Administrative leave," Olivia scoffed. "That means paid vacation while they investigate themselves." "Don't worry," Thomas assured her. "The federal investigation trumps their internal one, and we've got more than enough for criminal charges now." Olivia's phone buzzed with a text from her law professor. "Remarkable work exposing this. Would you share your experience with my civil rights class next month?" She smiled, showing Thomas the message. Despite everything, some good was coming from this nightmare. Late that night, Officer Delgado slipped into the records room at the station. With the building nearly empty, he thought he could safely remove any remaining evidence of his misconduct. He was wrong. Internal affairs investigators, finally pressured into doing their job properly, had been watching him. As Delgado attempted to shred documents, they stepped from the shadows. "Officer Delgado," the lead investigator said, "you're making this much worse for yourself." Delgado's face drained of color as he realized he'd been caught. By morning, the news had spread. Delgado was suspended without pay and facing additional charges of evidence tampering. At the police station, the blue wall was crumbling. More officers came forward, describing how the pressure for arrests had corrupted the department. Some admitted falsifying reports to please superiors. Others revealed how complaints were routinely buried. The police chief called an emergency press conference, sweat visible on his forehead. In light of disturbing new information, he announced shakily, "I've initiated termination proceedings against Officer Delgado and Lieutenant Wilson. Furthermore, I've requested an independent review of all department policies." Thomas watched the announcement on TV, his expression grim but satisfied. "It's just the beginning," he told Olivia. "They're still hoping to contain the damage. But too many people are talking now. The whole system is about to be exposed."